Voices of the Forgotten. Graveyard. It began with a whisper. Not the kind passed between friends or lovers in quiet rooms, but a sound that slid beneath your skin like a splinter of ice. It came at dusk, when the wind turned strange and the sky stretched too long across the horizon, bleeding red into black like a wound that wouldn't heal. I was walking home from the edge of town, the old road behind the mill, when I heard it. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Just a whisper, tangled in the breeze. Elias. I stopped that no one was around. The trees on either side of the path leaned in closer than I remembered. The air smelled like damp leaves and something older, like burnt wood and rain that hadn't fallen in years. That I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the wind. But deep down, something shifted, like a rope tugged softly inside my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. The whisper stayed with me. In the silence between the ticking of my wall clock, in the spaces between my thoughts. I tried to drown it out with music, with the television, even with my own voice, but it was still there, always just behind the noise, waiting. And then the dreams began. I stood in a field I didn't recognize. Not empty, but filled with broken stones and trees that bent like they were mourning. A graveyard. The sky above was colorless, a wide, empty void, and I could feel the ground breathing beneath my feet. The graves whispered my name. All of them. Over and over. Elias. When I woke, my pillow was damp. My hands were shaking. I tried to forget. But the next night, it returned. Stronger. More vivid. This time, I walked among the graves. Each stone I passed held a name I didn't know, but somehow, I felt I should know them, like they'd been carved into some deeper part of me. The fourth night, I found a grave at the center of the field, covered in moss. Cold. Silent. My name was on it. Elias Grayson. That was when I stopped pretending it wasn't real. I was 29. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or fate. I was a quiet man in a quiet town, the kind of person who lived by routine. Coffee at 8, work at 9, lunch at 1, home by 6, microwave dinner, news, shower, sleep, repeat. I had no reason to chase voices in the dark, but that whisper never left. It followed me through the days. It grew louder in mirrors, softer when I tried to speak it aloud. My friends started to notice. I stopped answering texts, calls. I drifted. I disappeared, not from the world, but from myself. I became a man walking towards something he couldn't see, but knew was waiting. And I knew exactly where it wanted me to go. There's a place outside of Elbridge, an old trail through the woods that hasn't been walked in decades. My grandfather used to warn me about it. Don't follow the birds west of the mill, he'd say. They don't sing there. They remember. I never understood what he meant, but I did now. On the seventh night, I packed a flashlight, a thermos of black coffee, and a notebook where I'd written every name I'd heard in my dreams. There were dozens, maybe more. Some were old and faded like forgotten lullabies. Others were sharp, recent, desperate. I didn't know why they came to me, but I was done ignoring them. I left my apartment at midnight. The streets were empty. The town slept like it always had, unaware of the eyes that watched it from the trees. The walk to the trail took 20 minutes. I didn't take my car. It felt wrong, too modern, too fast. Some places you can only reach the old way. Step by step, breath by breath. The forest was darker than it should have been. My flashlight flickered as I passed the old boundary where the pavement ended. The trees here were thicker, taller, their trunks twisted with age, bark peeling like dead skin. No wind, no insects, just silence. And the whisper. It guided me through overgrown paths, past thickets and stones and places where the air thinned. I walked for what felt like hours. Time lost meaning. My hands were numb. My feet were wet from dew and decay. And then, I saw it. The forgotten graveyard. It wasn't marked. No gate, no walls. Just a field, sunken into the earth like it had given up trying to belong to the world above. The headstones were old, older than any I'd ever seen. Cracked, half swallowed by weeds, their names faded by time. But the air, it pulsed, like breath. Like waiting. I stepped inside. Something in me shifted. Not fear, something older. Like recognition, the graves whispered again. Louder now. Urgent. Elias. It wasn't a greeting. It was a memory. One I hadn't earned. One I hadn't lived. The flashlight dimmed again. I turned it off. The moon was high, hidden behind clouds, but still the graveyard glowed faintly. Like the earth remembered its dead, that I walked among the stones. Some bore symbols I didn't recognize, circles, lines, spirals. Not religious, not cultural, just markings, messages, warnings that I found the willow at the center of the field. Its trunk was wide, gnarled. Its branches hung low, heavy with leaves that barely moved. Beneath it was a single grave, newer than the others. The only one untouched by moss or time that I didn't need to read the name that I already knew. Elias Grayson. My knees buckled. I fell to the dirt. It wasn't possible. I was alive. I was standing there, breathing, but the grave knew me, and in that moment, I remembered. Not this life. Another time. Another death, flashes. A candle in the dark. Blood on my hands. A promise broken. A door that should never have been opened. A woman crying. A scream. And then, silence. Burial. The earth took me once, and now it wanted me again. The willow creaked. The ground trembled. The voices rose, not whispers now, shouts. Screams. Wails of grief and rage and memory. I covered my ears, but the sound came from inside. Inside my head. Inside my blood. They wanted to be heard. To be known. To be remembered. And I was the one who could remember them. Because I had been here before. I ran. I don't remember how. My legs moved, but the path was gone. The forest twisted. Trees bent the wrong way. Shadows leaned toward me, reaching. The whisper followed. Louder. Closer. Elias, stay. I burst through the tree line just before dawn, collapsed in the grass. The sun rose, pale and quiet. I should have felt relief, but I didn't, because something had followed me. I can feel it now. In the quiet corners of my apartment. In the fogged mirror after a shower. In the reflection that doesn't blink when I do. There with me. The voices, they speak of things I've never done and things I've yet to do. They show me names, places, sins. They tell me the world forgets too easily, and that some memories refuse to die. I tried to leave Elbridge last week. My car wouldn't start. The mechanic said the engine was fine. My phone won't hold a signal outside the town limits. My mailbox fills with letters that have no return address, just names. Names I don't know, but I will, because that's my purpose now. Remembered. Hear them. Write their stories. And when the time comes to return, the grave is still there, beneath the willow, waiting. Would you like to now continue? The graveyard hadn't changed. 3 weeks had passed since that night, since I saw my name carved into stone beneath the willow and ran like hell through a forest that didn't want me to leave. But now, standing again at the edge of that silent hill where gravestones leaned like sleeping bodies, I felt the same pressure on my chest, the same hum beneath the earth, the same feeling that time didn't flow here. It waited, and this time, it was waiting for me. I hadn't come willingly. My body may have walked the path, flashlight and notebook in hand, but my will had been eaten away day by day, thought by thought. Sleep offered no escape. I dreamed of the dead, not bones or coffins or worms, but stories, regrets, faces that flickered like dying lanterns. Sometimes I wept in my sleep. Sometimes I woke with dirt beneath my fingernails. I had stopped being alone long ago. The graveyard was calling me back to finish what had begun. The gate creaked open even though there was no gate. The path pulled at my feet like gravity reversed. My flashlight died again just as I reached the clearing. I didn't bother replacing the batteries this time. The moon was bright. The wind was gone. The earth remembered me. The willow stood unchanged, its limbs motionless like the long arms of a silent god. I could smell something now. Not rot, not flowers. Something sweeter, stranger, like incense left to smolder too long. I stepped forward, and the ground quivered. Just slightly, like breath held beneath the soil. The stone was still there. Elias Grayson. I didn't run this time. I knelt. My hand hovered over the name. I expected coldness, but the stone was warm. Almost pulsing. I'm here, I whispered. That was enough. The grave opened, not with violence, not with noise. The soil parted like fabric, silently folding inward, revealing not darkness, but light. Faint, flickering, blue-white and cold like moonfire. I should have hesitated, but I stepped in. I didn't fall. I descended, like walking into a memory that belonged to someone else. The air thickened. My ears rang. And then, silence. I was standing in a hallway. Not a tunnel. Not a dream. A hallway, wooden floors. Black walls. Doors on either side, hundreds, stretching into infinity, each carved with names. Some I recognized. Most I didn't. But every one of them, whispered, not out loud. Inside, beneath the skin, behind one door, I heard laughter. Behind another, sobbing. One shook with fists pounding from the other side. And I knew. These were the voices, the forgotten. This was where they lived. I walked. Slowly, carefully. The hallway breathed. Some doors had symbols. Some were cracked open. I stopped at the one marked Anna Ruth Grayson. My mother's name. My heart stopped. I hadn't spoken her name in years. She disappeared when I was a boy, gone without a trace, leaving behind only a song half sung and a lullaby hummed in the dark. I opened the door. The room was a memory, not mine. Hers. A kitchen I'd never seen. Curtains fluttering. A child laughing me. Younger, brighter. She held me in her arms and kissed my forehead. She was crying. The clock on the wall read 11:57. The memory stuttered. Blurred. Darkened. A man entered. Tall. Shadow-faced. His hands were wrong. Too long. Too pale. Fingers like bones pressed beneath wet skin. He whispered something to her. She screamed. Then the room vanished. I staggered back. The door closed. My name burned on the back of my eyes. Elias. Came her voice again, softer now. It wasn't your fault. Tears welled. But I couldn't stop. The hallway was shifting. Lights dimmed. Doors groaned. One door stood open now. Not a name carved into it, but a date. November 17th, 1896. My birthday. But, wrong. I stepped inside. There was a man hanging from a tree. Windless air. Dead leaves. A small crowd gathered below. The man wore my face. Older, worn, hollow-eyed. A note pinned to his chest. The price is memory. A child screamed. A woman fell to her knees. The rope snapped, and I fell with him. Back into darkness, back into the grave. I gasped, clawing at dirt, heart thundering. I was under the willow again. Above me, the tree shed its leaves in a slow, spiraling rain. Someone stood beside me. Not a ghost, but a girl. Maybe 10. Eyes gray. Dress old-fashioned. She looked like she'd been pulled from a photograph. Do you remember them yet? She asked. I tried to speak. Couldn't. They're waiting, she said. All of them. They want to be known. Who are you? I finally whispered. She smiled sadly. Your sister. My heart cracked open. I didn't have a sister. Never had. But I did. Once, before the forgetting. Before the graveyard took her name, the voices rose again. All around. Louder. Clearer. This time, they weren't screaming. They were speaking. Telling me their stories. One by one. A man who drowned saving a child. But no one remembered his name. A woman hanged for a crime her husband committed. A boy buried alive in 1742. A mother who walked into a lake with stones in her pockets. Each voice a thread. Each name a door. And I was their needle, their messenger, their scribe. The girl reached into her pocket and handed me something. A key. Next time, she whispered, you'll go deeper. I blinked. She was gone. I stood beneath the willow, dawn creeping on the horizon. My name still carved in stone. But now, others joined it. Names I'd written. Names I'd heard. Dozens. And still they came. The forgotten. They speak to me now always. In the hum of the fridge. In the static of the radio. In the hush before thunder. And I listen. Because I remember them. Because no one else will. And because the grave beneath the willow is never empty for long. Thank you for your patience. The key was small, iron-wrought, and cold no matter how long I held it. Its teeth were jagged, not like any lock I had ever seen, and the bow bore a single engraved word, memory. For days after that morning beneath the willow, I kept it in my pocket. I tried to go on with life, eat, sleep, work, but none of it mattered anymore. My thoughts were filled with voices I didn't invite, names I hadn't known, faces that appeared to me in mirrors, in puddles, even in dreams that weren't mine. I'd stand in my apartment and hear footsteps behind me in a room I hadn't entered. I'd look out the window and see gravestones blinking through the mist on my front lawn. Reality had frayed, and I was its thread. I stopped fighting it. I began writing, page after page. Names, descriptions, events. Some were long and tangled, others sharp and unfinished. I couldn't stop. My hands moved without me. The pen scratched into the paper like it had waited lifetimes to tell these stories. But still, The whisper came back, come deeper. The girl's voice. The sister I never knew I had. And I knew what I had to do. It was a new moon the night I returned. I packed nothing. I didn't need a flashlight. The trees remembered me now. The path unfolded like a memory you didn't know was still inside you. And when I stepped into the graveyard again, it no longer felt foreign. It felt like home. The willow stood still. Its limbs hung low, hiding the gravestone. But I knew the way. I walked to it. The stone had changed it, and no longer just my name. Dozens now. Hundreds. Names I'd written. Names I hadn't. I knelt and pressed the key to the soil. The ground trembled. And then it opened. Not like a door, but like a wound. Beneath me, the earth split into a spiral staircase of obsidian stone. The key dissolved in my hand, fading like smoke. I descended. Each step downwards felt heavier. The air pressed inward, thick and alive with voices that didn't speak, only watched. And then, I reached the door. It was massive. 12 feet tall, carved from what looked like bone and rust. A single keyhole at the center. The word memory pulsed across it in faint, glowing letters. The key may have vanished, but I was the key now. I placed my hand on the door. It opened with a scream. The space inside wasn't a room. It was a void, a hollow place. But within it stood doors, thousands. More than in the last hallway. These ones were older, some cracked and bleeding ink, some weeping dust. I stepped in, and they began to open, not all at once. One by one. And behind each one, a soul. The first was a woman named Judith Maybell. Her face appeared in the air like fog painting a portrait. She stood barefoot in a stone house, clutching her child to her chest as a man shouted from beyond the walls. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just whispered the child's name over and over. Then, silence. Behind her, the child grew. Alone. Forgotten. Swallowed by frost. The world erased them, but I remembered. I turned, and her name burned into the walls of the hollow door. Then came the next. A soldier. Benjamin Crane. 1917, bleeding in a trench. Hands trembling. Praying in a language long since dead. But no one came. The world moved on. His memory, buried not by dirt, but indifference. But I saw him. I heard him, and his whisper joined the others. The more doors I passed, the more I remembered. Some screamed. Some begged. Some simply asked to be known. One door shook violently, sealed tight. I touched it, and fire poured through my veins. Inside, a man, Silas Grayson, my great-grandfather, accused of sorcery, burned beneath a hanging tree that no longer existed. His final words, "You will forget me, but I will remember you." The flames reached me. I screamed, and the void heard me. The walls shook. The names flashed like lightning across the bones of the room. And then, the hallway began to collapse. Not physically, but spiritually. It knew I had seen too much. It wanted to keep its dead silent, but I wouldn't allow it. I reached into the air and pulled out the notebook, the same one from my apartment. Only now, its pages were filled. Thousands of names, places, lives. The dead had used my hand. I shouted into the void, "You are not forgotten." And the room cracked open. The doors blew off their hinges. The whispers became voices. The voices became screams. And in the center of it all stood the girl that my sistered, in no longer 10. Now a woman, her eyes ancient and heavy with grief. "You've opened it," she said. "What is this place?" "The Library of the Lost," she replied. "Where names go when no one speaks them. Where stories go to rot. And now they'll return." And they did. The wind above the graveyard howled. The gravestones shimmered with light. All across Elbridge, across the world, people dreamed of names they'd never heard and woke up crying. The forgotten were coming back, not as ghosts, but as memories, as truths, and I was the one who held the key. The fog rolled in like a slow breath from a dying mouth. It didn't move like wind or mist. It slithered, cold, thick, gray, as if it had memory. David stood at the gates of the graveyard again. The same gates he had once vowed never to cross. But tonight, something had changed. The whispers had grown louder, not from beyond, but from within. Not calling him away from the world, but deeper into it. The graveyard, once familiar, now looked older than time. The wrought iron was rusted with something darker than age. The trees leaned in ways that trees shouldn't. Their bark seemed to frown. and the path beneath his boots no longer crunched. It groaned. Somewhere in the center of that forgotten patch of earth, someone was waiting. Or something. Because names had started to vanish from the stones. Letters flaked off. Whole names blurred. And those whose names disappeared, so did their memory, gone from the world. As if they never existed, it wasn't just a curse anymore, that it was a feeding. David walked slowly between the rows. The familiar markers from childhood. Ms. Penelope with the broken angel statue, Mr. Farnsby whose grave always bloomed with wild tulips, were now erased. Tulips were gone. The angel's wings snapped clean off. And the names, gone. In their place, pale, gaping stone. Blank slates, like mouths wide open, hungry for sound, for identity. David reached down and brushed the dirt off one of the stones, still blank. He whispered the name he knew should be there. Penelope ran, and the wind hissed at a faint pressure wrapped around his throat. A warning. She's already been taken, came a voice. David spun. There, behind the gnarly tree line, stood the old groundskeeper. But something was different about him now. His coat was heavier, his face more hollow, like someone had taken a part of his soul and never returned it. "You're late," the man said. "It's begun." David swallowed. "What's begun?" "The consumption," he said, his voice gravel thick. "The name eaters." He didn't want to believe it. The story he'd heard as a child. A tale told by grave diggers and drunks. That some spirits don't just linger, they feed. Not on flesh, not on blood, but on memory. On names. They start with whispers. They infect the stones. They erase your name, then your face, then every trace of you in the waking world, even in dreams, until even you don't remember who you were. And the name eaters, they grow. You saw what happened to your friend, didn't you? The groundskeeper asked, eyes dark. David nodded. The image still burned into his mind. Elena. Her grave had collapsed inward, and every photo of her, every document, journal, letter, had faded blank. Even her mother couldn't remember giving birth. It was as if Elena had never existed. "They eat backwards," the man whispered. "From death to birth. They chew through time until they wipe you clean from it." David shivered. "How do we stop them?" The old man looked at the sky, which was dark, though the moon refused to show. "You don't." That night, the whispers grew louder. David didn't go home to the farthest corner of the graveyard, the one no one visited, where names had long stopped being carved. He began digging with his bare hands. The soil wasn't just dirt. It was ash, bits of bone, fragments of nameplates too cracked to read. Something down there pulsed, like a buried heart. When his fingers struck something solid, he didn't hesitate. He cleared it, revealing a stone older than any marker he'd ever seen. No writing, no date, just a jagged mark. And beneath it, blood, fresh, warm, trickling up from the soil. That's when the screaming began. It didn't come from the wind, or the town, or the living. It came from the graves. Hundreds of voices, rising at once, in agony. Some begged to be remembered, others begged to be forgotten, and one just laughed. A woman's voice. Hollow, ageless, cruel. "You can't stop hunger, boy. You can only feed it." David staggered back, chest heaving. The name eating had begun in earnest. And his name, David Mercer, was starting to fade. He raced home, desperate for anchors. He tore open boxes. Birth certificate? The ink was smeared. School yearbooks? His face was blurred. Family photos? Empty frames. Even his own voicemail. It just said, "User not found." His hands trembled. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. All he heard was his own voice, whispering back, "Who are you?" He returned to the graveyard one last time, bringing something sacred, a piece of his childhood diary, where he had written his name over and over, as kids do. The handwriting was messy, but it was still his. He tore out the page and buried it where he'd first heard the whispers, beneath the old hanging tree. The wind stopped, the fog slowed, and from the shadows emerged a figure, not a ghost, not a man. A being made of forgotten syllables and undone names. A name eater, in its truest form. Its face flickered, sometimes David's own, sometimes Elena's, sometimes no face at all. Its voice echoed like a chorus of lost souls. "You think paper can save you?" David looked it in the eye. "No. But memory can." He pulled a knife across his palm and let the blood drip onto the diary page. I remember them, he said. I speak their names. And one by one, he began to say them aloud. Elena Wren, Penelope, Farnsby, every name he could remember, even half remember. And with each name, the creature shrieked that it clawed at its own face, at the sky, at the soil. And then it vanished, not with a bang, but a whimper, like a whisper that no longer had anywhere left to go. David collapsed. The graveyard was still. Morning came, and the names began to return, stone by stone, letter by letter. But something had changed in David. He was no longer sure if he had truly survived, or if he now belonged to the graveyard as well, because when he looked in the mirror the next day, he couldn't remember his middle name. The fog returned on the fifth night. I should have known then that something was about to break. I was still in the same cottage by the edge of the graveyard, abandoned, decrepit, but strangely comforting now. The boards on the windows groaned with the wind. The lantern I'd hung in the corner sputtered with a nervous flame. And the book, the black one I'd found buried beneath the ivy-covered grave near the back of the cemetery, sat in the center of the table, still open to the page I couldn't bear to turn. Each night since I read from it, the whispers had grown louder. Not just at night anymore. They'd begun during the day, even under full sunlight. They no longer waited for the dark, and worst of all, they knew my name now. Elias. It wasn't the wind. It never was. It was never the trees or the creak of the house settling. I told myself that lie many times, but it didn't stick. Elias, help us. Sometimes it was a voice I'd heard before, a child's laugh echoing in reverse, or the dragging moan of something with too many teeth. Other times it sounded like someone I'd known once, long ago, calling to me through dreams I hadn't had yet. But last night was different. The bell rang. That rusted chapel bell that hadn't worked for decades. The one without a rope, its wool frozen in place with rust and vine. I had stared up at it many times, wondering who once rang it for mourning and how many came here to bury their secrets. It rang at midnight 3 times, clear and slow, and then silence, as if the whole world had taken a breath and didn't know how to exhale. I stepped outside into the fog, barefoot on wet stone. The cemetery was quiet, still. Gravestones jutted out of the earth like crooked teeth. I could feel something pulling me toward the chapel ruins at the center, its collapsed roof now more ash than wood. That was when I heard her again. The girl. She'd first appeared on the second night after I read the book aloud. A girl in white, standing among the graves near the willow tree, hair floating as if underwater. No shadow, no breath. Her mouth didn't move, but I felt her words crawl behind my ears. You're the last one left. I didn't understand then. But now I feared I did. Tonight, I followed her, not because I trusted her, but because the book had said I must. She didn't walk, she drifted. I watched her pass through old stones and collapsed fences like mist curling through fingers. Her head tilted once toward me as she passed a grave with a shattered angel. It bore no name, just a rusted iron plate with a handprint burned into it. She paused, hovering over it, and then she pointed down, not toward the grave, but beneath it. By the time I reached her, the fog had thickened into something heavier than air. I knelt and pressed my palm to the soil, warm. Iron warm. The way blood feels in the final seconds before cooling. I didn't have a shovel, but I dug anyway, hands raw, nails cracked, dirt packed hard and wet, like it didn't want to let go of what it held. I don't know how long I dug. Hours, maybe. The sky never changed. The moon never moved. Time had folded itself. Then my fingers hit metal. A lid, cold now. The coffin wasn't like the others I'd seen unearthed here before. This one was sealed with melted lead. It seems burned shut. Carvings etched in symbols I recognized from the book, binding runes, old and angry. I didn't have to open it. It opened for me. A low groan. A hiss, and then the lid shifted. She was inside. The girl in white. Not floating now. Dead, perfectly preserved. Skin like wax. Eyes wide open, but something wasn't right. Something was behind her. Something pressed beneath her body, wrapped in her arms like a thing she refused to let go. It was moving. It was breathing. I reached in, not because I wanted to, because I had to. The fog was pulsing now. The bell rang again, but I wasn't in the graveyard anymore. I was somewhere older, deeper that I touched it. Cloth, leather, no skin. It uncoiled. Long arms, too long. Limbs wrapped around themselves like vines. A face buried beneath folds of gray tissue and moss. And when it opened its eyes, they were mine. It screamed, and the world tore in half. I woke up back in the cottage, sweating, bleeding from the palms, dirt under my fingernails. The lantern had gone out. The book was closed, and something had been left beside me. A piece of paper, burnt edges. A new page. You have freed the first voice. 6 remain. The soil remembers. I wanted to run, to leave this place and never speak its name again. But the road out was gone, literally gone. Where the path once led down to the main road, there was now only more graveyard. As if the land had moved, or grown. Dozens more graves, new, fresh, unnamed. Some still open, waiting. They were watching me, and I knew, without needing to be told, that I had become part of this place now. That night, I didn't sleep. I listened, and the graveyard spoke back. Elias, he stirs. He's listening now, deeper. He has the eye. I opened the book again. Another page had written itself. A map, but not of the graveyard. Of what was beneath it. Tunnels, chambers, an ossuary of forgotten rituals, markings that pulsed when touched, names that had been carved out and replaced with numbers, and one word repeated again and again. Vorin. I didn't know what it meant then, but I do now. The ground beneath the chapel held a stairwell I hadn't noticed before. Cracked stones spiraling into black. I took the lantern, the book, and a knife I didn't know how to use, and I descended, step after step. The air thickened. The stone walls grew damp with a fluid that wasn't water. At one point, I passed carvings etched by fingernails. Names. Elias, my name. It had been there long before I ever came. The chamber at the bottom was circular. Bones lined the walls like decor. At the center stood a well, sealed in black wax and runes. And chained to it, in pieces, was a man. Or what was left of one. He looked at me with eyes missing pupils. Lips sewn, chest rising once every 5 minutes. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't alive. And carved into his forehead was that same word, Vorin. I stepped forward. He smiled. And then the well began to whisper. It spoke in 1,000 voices. Children, priests, beggars, the girl, my father, myself. And then it said the truth. You were never sent here. You were born here, buried here, called back. You are not the listener, Elias. You are the grave. I stumbled back. The man on the chains began to hum, and the floor beneath me cracked. Light exploded. Memory flooded. I saw the girl again, but this time not dead. I saw her laugh. I saw myself next to her. Then I saw the ritual, the ceiling, the screams. My own voice begging to be silenced. And then I woke. This time in the chapel itself. Morning light. No whispers. The book was gone, but in my pocket, a piece of paper. Burnt edges. 3 words. 5 remain. Dig. I am not Elias. Not really. I am what was left of him. And the graveyard, it does not whisper anymore. It sings. The rain had stopped, but the earth still breathed with the scent of something buried too long. My boots pressed into the wet soil like fingers into flesh, and every step felt like an intrusion. I hadn't been back to the graveyard since the last voice stopped speaking, since the name-eaters came for what was left of the wind. I thought silence meant I was done, but nothing that dies here stays gone, and nothing forgotten stays quiet. My name doesn't matter. If you've come this far, you already know who I am, or at least what I've become. The keeper of things no one wants to remember. The listener. The one who walks where the dead aren't ready to rest. And tonight, I return not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. It began with the dream. Or maybe not a dream. It started with the sound of scratching beneath my bed, then whispers through the walls that used my voice. When I awoke, I found my own handwriting on my mirror, but I hadn't touched a pen. One word, over and over. Still here. I didn't need more signs. The graveyard was calling again. Not to remember, but to witness. I passed the crumbling iron gates just after midnight. The moon was drowned in clouds, and my lantern hissed in my hand like it didn't want to burn. But I pressed forward. The paths had changed. The graves rearranged themselves. Or perhaps it was my memory cracking under the weight of things it was never meant to carry. The air was thick. The kind of thick that filled your lungs with questions. I felt the familiar pull toward the old section, the unmarked graves, the crooked rows, the part where names no longer mattered. That's where they always began. I reached the hill, the one with the leaning tree, its bark peeled like blistered skin, its roots wrapped around the gravestones like a hand clutching secrets. That's where I first heard her. A girl's voice. Clear, young, but aged with something else, something wrong. She wasn't whispering like the others. She was humming. A melody without comfort. A lullaby meant to put you to sleep forever. I followed it. Closer. Each step colder than the last. The humming stopped. A low giggle followed. Then silence. I raised the lantern. Light flickered across the stones. One in particular glowed damp with moss. It had no name, just a small carved shape. A child's handprint, pressed into stone. I knelt, and my breath fogged the air. And then the ground exhaled softly, wetly. Then her voice. I remember you. I didn't run. You'd think I would have by now. But fear is a habit, and I had long since broken it. I don't remember you, I said. You should. You left me here. You said you'd come back. Her voice trembled, but not with sadness. With resentment. Where are you? I asked. A tiny giggle floated up from the soil. Closer than you think. I stepped back. That's when I saw the finger, just one. Pale, thin, poking out from the edge of the grave. Still. Then it curled. I stumbled, the lantern swaying, shadows bending around me like claws. I knew this wasn't about her. Not entirely. This grave, this voice, it was the entrance. The invitation. Say my name, she whispered. I don't know it. You did. You do. You just forgot. The wind picked up. But it wasn't wind. It was breath. From beneath the ground. I turned. The graveyard had changed again. In no longer crooked rows. In no longer stones. Just mouths. Hundreds. Silent. Open mouths carved into the dirt. The trees. The stones. They were waiting. The girl's voice again. Smaller now. You forget so many. They never stop remembering you. I couldn't breathe. The air was wrong. Like lungs weren't meant to work here anymore. I moved. Not away, just forward. Always forward. Because if you stand still here, the ground remembers how to open. Past the child's grave, the path dipped into a hollow I'd never seen before. Fog clung to the edges like curtains pulled aside for a stage. And what stood in the middle of it wasn't human. A figure. Tall. Draped in fabric that moved like smoke underwater. Its head was wrapped in burial cloth, stained dark where the eyes should have been. And its arms? Too many. All bent wrong. It didn't move. But it spoke. Not from a mouth, but from around me. I keep the ones who were silenced. Its voice was slow, grinding, as if made of bones grinding together. I should have turned back. I didn't. What do you want from me? I asked. It raised one hand, or something like a hand, and pointed to the graves behind it. Each one had no stone. Just a mirror. In each mirror, I saw a faced my face, but changed, older. Broken. Lost. And in one, I wasn't alone. A little girl stood beside me. The one from the song. Holding my hand. Crying. You took their stories, the voice said. You held their last words. But you never kept them. You just moved on. I didn't forget, I said. But you didn't stay. The fog thickened. The mouths in the dirt began to murmur. Not words, sounds of sorrow, choking, fear. The final moments of those buried beneath, the girl's voice again. Don't leave me again. And then, I remembered. Her name. Lena. My sister. Dead before I turned 12. Drowned. Lost. Buried here. In this very graveyard before I understood what death truly meant. I fell to my knees. The mirrors cracked. The fog split open. And from the grave rose a hand. Not small, not childish, but long, decayed, holding something. A locket. I reached out, took it, opened it. Inside, a picture of me, and beneath it, scratched words. You promised. Tears blurred my vision. I didn't know. The tall figure tilted its head. Now it stepped forward. Then remember now. It reached toward me. And instead of fear, I felt warmth. A sudden, impossible warmth. Lena's voice, now soft, almost kind. It's not too late to keep us. The mirrors shattered, the mouths closed, and for the first time, the graveyard felt quiet, but not empty, not angry, just watching. I stood. The locket still in my hand. I knew what this meant now. This wasn't a punishment. It was a burden. A choice that T.O. carry the names T.O. keep the voices that T.O. become not just the listener, but the keeper that I left the graveyard before dawn. The gates closed behind me, not with a groan, but a whisper. Come back when you're ready. And I would, because now I remembered. And the dead, they deserved that much. It had been 3 days since I last left the cabin. 3 days since the graveyard began whispering in daylight. I was used to the nights, used to the chill, the shadows, the voices just beneath the wind. But this wasn't what the dead were supposed to do. And yet, the names continued, burned into the walls in ash, carved into the floor beneath my bed, written in dew across the inside of the windows. Eleanor Dread, Jacob Ruse, Mother Petrel, the hollow ones. That last one stopped me cold. Not a name. A title. Like a warning that I sat in the middle of the wooden floor, wrapped in a blanket soaked through with my own sweat, and tried not to breathe too loud. There were things outside that listened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hollow ones. Tall, emaciated shadows with empty sockets where eyes should have been. I hadn't seen them in flesh, if that's what they had, but I felt them. Each time I heard my name whispered from the tree line that I made a mistake last night. I tried to answer back that I didn't say anything. I just whispered into the silence. What do you want? The graveyard answered. I was running. Branches sliced at my arms as I pushed through the bramble behind the western ridge. I hadn't meant to run. I meant to pack my things and leave quietly. But when I opened the front door, the wind hissed stay, like a voice dragged across broken glass. And I ran that I don't know how long I stumbled through the forest. My flashlight flickered the moment I reached the gate, the old, iron gate with the family crest I could no longer identify. The wind shifted. It always did when I came near the cemetery. Not a gust, but a pressure. Like the air around it grew heavy with memory. But something was different this time. The ground was breathing. I swear to God, I felt it. Slow, shallow, rhythmic. Like an animal buried just beneath the soil. That's when I heard the music. Not music, really. A melody, if you could call it that. Hollow flutes. Bone chimes. A single voice humming from deep within the mausoleum that I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped over the threshold. The grass had withered. Where once I remembered wildflowers and mossy tombstones, now lay a wasteland of dust. The air smelled like mold and fire. The stones no longer bore names. They were smooth, blank, as though the people buried beneath them had been erased. That's when I saw her, that a girl in white, standing at the foot of the obelisk that marked the graveyard's center, barefoot, and no eyes. Just a soft gray skin pulled tight over sockets that had long ago forgotten light. She turned toward me and smiled. You came back, she said, in a voice like dead leaves dragging across stone. I never wanted to come back, I whispered, but they remember you. She pointed toward the open earth point. One of the graves was fresh, and no name on it, but I knew it was mine. I backed away, nearly tripping over the edge of a stone angel with broken wings. The statue wept black from its eyes. Why? I asked her. The girl in white tilted her head. Because you asked what they wanted. The wind turned bitter. Behind her, from the shadows, they began to appear, tall, rigid, movements too smooth, too wrong. The hollow ones. I counted 3, then 5, then 7. Each one with a mouth stitched shut. Each one with hands that trembled at their sides, like they wanted to speak, to scream, but couldn't. The girl moved toward me. You opened the gate. No, I said. I didn't. You remembered them. That's how they feed. The hollow ones took a step closer. The ground beneath me throbbed like a heartbeat. You belong here now, she whispered. You always did. No, they named you, she said. And once they name you, you become part of the grave. I ran. This time, I didn't look back. The forest cracked and groaned behind me, as if the trees themselves were trying to hold me in. Shadows licked the edge of my vision, and I swear I felt hands brushing the back of my neck. But I didn't stop until I collapsed on the porch of the cabin, lungs burning, legs giving out beneath me. The whispers followed, but softer now, more like murmurs of satisfaction that I hadn't escaped. I delivered myself. I spent the rest of the night barricading the door, nailing planks over the windows, taping names to every wall of the cabin. Not mine. Theirs. I thought if I could name them first, they couldn't take me. I was wrong. The next morning, the door was opened. I know I locked it. Nailed it. Even. But there it was, swinging gently in the breeze. And on the step, a box, small, wooden, no hinges, no markings, just a slip of paper beneath it, written in red. You forgot your name. I picked up the box. That it was cold. Inside it, a tooth. Still wet, still warm, and I recognized it. The chip in the edge, the stain near the root. That it was mine. That I ran to the bathroom mirror and opened my mouth. Point one tooth missing. That I hadn't noticed. They had taken it in the night. I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. Every hour, something else changed. More names appeared on the walls. My reflection grew fainter. My voice echoed back to me in delay. My own shadow began moving before I did. That I stopped calling anyone. I knew no one would come. People don't come to the graveyard once it names you. They forget you. By the fourth night, I decided to return. Not to surrender, but to end it. That I packed a rope, a can of gasoline, and a rusted iron key I found behind the chimney years ago, the one marked with the word remember. I walked to the graveyard just after dusk. The wind did not resist me. That in fact, it welcomed me. Inside the graveyard, the obelisk was glowing faintly. The girl was gone, but the hollow ones were waiting. They stood in a circle around the fresh grave. That my grave. Point one of them pointed to the shovel. That I stepped forward and began to dig. I don't know what I expected. Bones? A coffin? No, I found stairs. Descending into the earth. That I lit a match and stepped inside. The underground passage was older than the town itself. Walls of packed soil and root, laced with fragments of tombstones and decaying portraits. The deeper I went, the more I heard them. Voices, not just whispers now, but stories. She drowned her children. He buried them alive beneath the school. They fed on silence. Every story was a sin. Every name, a debt. And then I reached the chamber. That a vast cavern lined with hundreds of faces, masks, each one carved from bone. Each one labeled with a name. Point one space was empty. The tag beneath it read, yours. I don't remember screaming. That I only remember the girl's voice behind me. Put it on. I turned. She held a mask. My face, hollowed, smiling. I ran again. Not out of fear, but because something inside me had begun to agree with her. That I wanted to stay. That's when I knew I had to escape. I climbed out of the grave by dawn. Drenched in dirt, coughing blood, clutching the mask I refused to wear. The hollow ones stood at the edge of the clearing, but they did not follow. They only watched, and slowly, they turned away, retreating into the fog. I returned to the cabin and burned everything. The walls, the names, the box, the tooth. That I left. With nothing but the clothes on my back and a whisper in my ear. This isn't over. It never is. Once the graveyard names you, it remembers forever, and someday, so will you. The graveyard was no longer still. It breathed. It pulsed beneath my boots like a slumbering heart, damp and ancient. Every time I stepped, the moss-covered stones seemed to twitch, as though bones beneath were shifting in anticipation. The wind no longer howled. It whispered, and it whispered my name. I never knew my name had such weight until they began using it. The voices, the forgotten, they had followed me. Not just through the graveyard, but into my sleep, into my skin, into the silence between my thoughts. They had made me their vessel. I used to think I was helping them. Now I know I was part of something far older than mercy and far colder than death. They called me keeper. But keep what? I stood at the center of the graveyard, where the land dipped into a shallow, unnatural basin surrounded by ancient mausoleums. In the center, a single grave waited for me, its headstone blank, as it always had been. Until now. Carved into the moss-dark stone were words that had never been there before. The final name. A chill pierced through my jacket and sliced into my chest. I didn't want to touch it, but I was already walking forward. My hands, no longer entirely mine, reached out and brushed the cold stone. The wind stopped, and the grave opened. Not with earth breaking apart. No. The soil simply gave way, like water, and from it rose a figure. That a woman, or the memory of one. That her eyes were hollow, sockets filled not with darkness, but light. Painful, burning light. Her body shimmered like mist held in shape by sorrow. She did not speak. Her lips didn't need to move. Her voice filled my head like thunder underwater. You are the last voice. Speak my name. I tried to answer, but my throat locked. That I couldn't speak. I didn't know her name. The graves around me began to tremble. One by one, The stones cracked and split, not vertically, but horizontally, like mouths opening. Voices screamed, "Speak her name. You brought us this far. Finish this circle." I stumbled back. The fog thickened until I could barely see my hands. I called out, begging, pleading, cursing myself for ever coming back. Then I heard it. The name, whispered not by the voices, but by the wind. Elandra. It echoed around me, then inside me. Like a key in a rusted lock, something turned behind my sternum. I looked at her, the figure of sorrow and radiance standing over the open grave. "Elandra," I said, aloud. She smiled. And everything went wrong. The ground beneath the mausoleum split in a quake so sudden I dropped to my knees. Black roots. No. Arms. No. Shadows shaped like both. Burst from the soil and latched onto every grave, every crypt, every stone. The graveyard screamed. Delandra's figure bent backward in an impossible arc, her mouth opening wide until it became a void, swallowing light. And from her throat came not her voice, but all of them. Every forgotten soul I'd ever heard. Every whisper that had haunted me. Every secret buried in shallow graves. They poured out of her like a storm. Names. So many names. Names I'd spoken. Names I hadn't. Names no human should have remembered. And they were all coming for me that I tried to run. But I couldn't move. Because it was my name they wanted now that I was no longer the keeper. I was the last one to be kept. That I screamed. Not with my mouth, but with my mind. Reaching out for any help, any salvation. And then, it stopped. The wind died. The light vanished. The grave was sealed. And I was alone. I awoke in my own bed. I in my apartment. I in the city. I gasped. Sat up, drenched in sweat. A nightmare day. Hallucination. A curse. I rushed to the mirror. My face looked the same. My eyes looked clear. But then I saw a dot on the side of my neck. A small mark, shaped like a headstone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard them. Not screaming, not crying, but calling. Come back. I tried to bury the truth. I moved away, changed my name, burned my journal, but it never stopped. And then the real horror began. I started seeing others, strangers, with the same mark. On buses, in elevators, on the street. Some noticed me, and when they did, they nodded. As if they recognized a fellow keeper. Or something worse. A letter arrived at my door 2 months later, no return address. Inside, a photo, the graveyard. Only, it wasn't overgrown anymore. It had been restored, clean, lit, maintained, and in the center, the same grave, still marked the final name. Only now, there was a name beneath it, mine. I dropped the photo. My knees gave out. I wept, not because I was afraid, but because I knew the truth. You don't visit the graveyard. You don't find it. It finds you. And when it does, you start hearing them, the forgotten voices. I don't remember how I got back there. One moment I was in my room. The next, fog, stone, silence. But not alone. They waited for me. A ring of figures. Not ghosts. Not quite. Keepers, just like me. Eyes hollow. Necks marked. Voices muted. I stepped into the circle. And I understood that I wasn't the last. I was the next. One of them stepped forward. Elandra. Her face softer now. Kind. She took my hand and whispered, "Thank you for remembering us." Then I was no longer standing. I was floating, not above the grave, but below it. Inside it, surrounded by names. Held in their arms. That we were the forgotten. And now, so are you.